The dawn broke with a fierce crimson glow across the endless Colorado sky as Rhett Hawkins returned to his campsite after an early morning scout of the surrounding terrain. He froze in his tracks, one hand instinctively moving to the weathered Colt revolver at his hip. There, curled beside his chestnut stallion Thunder, lay a woman wrapped in tattered clothes, her dark hair splayed across the rocky ground like spilled ink against the earth. Thunder nickered softly, seemingly untroubled by the stranger who had appeared during Rhett's brief absence. The mare had always been a good judge of character, which gave Rhett pause. Instead of drawing his weapon, he approached cautiously, boots crunching on the dry ground. The sound stirred the woman, and she bolted upright, fear evident in her wide eyes. "Easy now," Rhett said, his voice gentle despite its natural gruffness. The sun caught his features, a strong jaw darkened by several days' worth of stubble, eyes the color of faded denim, and a face weathered by years under the unforgiving western sun. At 32, Rhett had seen enough of life to approach unexpected situations with caution rather than alarm. The woman scrambled backward, pressing herself against Thunder's flank. The horse, surprisingly, remained calm, even turning to nuzzle the stranger's shoulder. "I won't hurt you," Rhett continued, stopping several paces away and crouching down to appear less threatening. His lips curved into an unexpected smile. "Stay for breakfast. I was just about to cook up some beans and bacon." For a long moment, the woman said nothing, her gaze darting between Rhett and the surrounding landscape as if calculating her chances of escape. Finally, her shoulders relaxed a fraction, though wariness remained etched in every line of her body. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse, as if she hadn't used it in days. Rhett nodded, moving slowly to the small campfire he'd built before his morning scout. "Name's Rhett Hawkins," he offered, placing a small cast iron pan over the rekindled flames. "Most folks around these parts know me as the man who delivers mail between Manassas and the outlying homesteads." The woman watched him intently, gradually releasing her death grip on Thunder's mane. "Zara," she finally said. "Zara Jennings." "Well, Miss Jennings," Rhett replied, slicing bacon into the pan, "you look like you've had a rough go of it. Don't mean to pry, but it's not often I find a lady sleeping beside my horse in the middle of nowhere. 1883. A hint of color touched Zara's cheeks. "I was running," she admitted, her eyes downcast. "I saw your campsite from the ridge, but you weren't here. I only meant to rest for a moment." She paused, swallowing hard. "Your horse was kind to me," Rhett chuckled. "Thunder's got a soft spot for strays." He gestured to the coffee pot sitting near the fire. "There's coffee if you'd like some. It's strong enough to put hair on your chest, though I reckon that's not what you're aiming for." A ghost of a smile touched Zara's lips, transforming her face. Despite the dirt and exhaustion, Rhett could see she was beautiful, perhaps in her mid-20s, with striking features and unusual amber-flecked eyes. "Where you headed?" Rhett asked, careful to keep his tone conversational as he stirred the contents of the pan. "Manassas about a day's ride northwest of here." "Anywhere," Zara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anywhere they won't find me." Rhett nodded, asking no further questions as he served up the simple meal on 2 tin plates. He'd encountered enough people with secrets in his years, delivering mail through the Colorado territory, to recognize when someone needed space rather than interrogation. They ate in silence, though Rhett noticed how Zara devoured the food with the intensity of someone who hadn't eaten properly in days. When she finished, she set the plate down carefully and looked directly at him for the first time. "Thank you, Mr. Hawkins." "Just Rhett is fine," he replied, gathering the plates. "And you're welcome. We all need help sometimes out here." Zara glanced at the horizon, anxiety returning to her features. "I should go." "Where to?" Rhett asked practically. "On foot, with no supplies, in territory crawling with coyotes, outlaws, and worse." Her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I don't have many options." Rhett considered the woman before him. His instincts, which had kept him alive through the chaos of post-war America and the dangerous frontier, told him she wasn't a threat. Troubled, certainly. Running from something serious, definitely. But not dangerous to him. "I'm headed to Manassas to deliver some packages and letters," he said finally. "You're welcome to ride along. Town's small enough to hide in, but big enough that strangers don't draw too much attention." Hope flickered across Zara's face. "Why would you help me? You don't know anything about me." Rhett began packing up his campsite with practiced efficiency. "Let's just say I've been on the wrong side of luck before, and someone showed me kindness when they didn't have to. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "Thunder seems to have taken a liking to you, and she's pickier about people than I am." As if understanding his words, the chestnut mare nickered softly, nudging Zara's shoulder again. "I don't have money to pay you," Zara admitted. "Wasn't asking for any," Rhett replied, "though I wouldn't say no to help with the cooking tonight." For the first time, Zara's smile reached her eyes, transforming her face completely. "I make a decent rabbit stew if you can provide the rabbit." "Deal," Rhett said, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Zara placed her smaller hand in his calloused one. The contact was brief, but seemed to seal their agreement more than words could. Within the hour, they were on the trail to Manassas, Zara riding behind Rhett on Thunder's broad back. She kept a respectful distance, her hands lightly holding the sides of his worn leather coat for balance. As they rode, Rhett pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the mail routes he traveled, careful to avoid personal questions that might make his companion uncomfortable. By midday, they stopped near a creek to rest and water the horse. As Thunder drank deeply from the clear water, Rhett observed Zara cleaning the dirt from her face and hands, revealing skin several shades lighter than it had appeared earlier. Without the layer of trail dust, she looked even younger and more vulnerable. "Been running long?" he asked finally, passing her a strip of dried venison from his saddlebag. Zara accepted the food, her eyes fixed on the rippling creek. "3 days. Feels longer." Rhett nodded, not pushing further. "Well, we should reach Manassas by nightfall. I know a widow there who takes in boarders, Mrs. Sullivan. Decent woman, doesn't ask too many questions." "I can't impose. You won't be imposing if you're paying," Rhett interrupted gently. "And before you say it again, I know you don't have money." "But Mrs. Sullivan always needs help with cleaning and cooking. I reckon she'd be willing to trade room and board for labor, at least until you get your bearings." Zara studied him for a long moment. "Why are you really helping me, Mr. Hawkins?" Rhett met her gaze steadily. "Out here, people either help each other or they die. Simple as that. Whatever you're running from, it's your business, but everyone deserves a fighting chance." Something in his straightforward answer seemed to satisfy her. Zara nodded once, then turned back to the creek, dipping her handkerchief in the cool water and pressing it to the back of her neck. Rhett couldn't help but notice a series of fading bruises disappearing beneath her collar. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He'd seen enough of humanity's cruelty to recognize its marks. Whatever or whoever Zara Jennings was running from, Rhett was increasingly certain she had good reason. They continued their journey as the afternoon stretched on, the vast Colorado landscape unfolding around them. Rhett found himself increasingly aware of Zara's presence behind him, the light pressure of her hands against his sides, the occasional brush of her breath when the trail grew steep and she leaned closer. It had been a long time since he'd ridden with anyone, let alone a woman. You mentioned delivering mail, Zara said suddenly, breaking a long silence. How did you come to do that work? Rhett smiled at the tentative conversation. Fell into it after the war. Needed something that kept me moving but wasn't as dangerous as driving cattle or hunting bounties. The Postal Service was expanding routes out west, and I had a good horse and knew the territory. You fought in the war, she asked softly. Confederate cavalry, he admitted, his voice growing tighter. Not something I'm proud of anymore. I was young and foolish, thought I was fighting for home and honor. Learned the hard way that war's never that simple. Zara was quiet for a moment. My father fought for the Union, died at Antietam. Rhett nodded solemnly. I'm sorry. It was a terrible time. It was a long time ago, she replied. I barely remember him. As they crested a hill, Rhett pointed to a distant cluster of buildings nestled in a valley below. Manasseh, he announced. Not much to look at, but the people are decent enough. Got a general store, a small church, even a schoolhouse now. Been growing since '81 when more Mormon families settled here. Zara surveyed the town with obvious apprehension. Will they accept a stranger? They accepted me, Rhett said with a slight shrug. I'm not Mormon, but they're good neighbors. Keep to themselves mostly, but they're fair with outsiders. He guided Thunder down the slope. Besides, new faces pass through regular enough with the stage line running to Alamosa now. As they approached the outskirts of Manasseh, Rhett felt Zara tense behind him. We don't have to go straight into town, he offered. Mrs. Sullivan's place is on the eastern edge. We can head there directly if you'd prefer. The relief in her voice was palpable. Thank you. The sun was setting by the time they reached a modest clapboard house with a well-tended garden. Smoke curled from the chimney, and warm light spilled from the windows. Rhett dismounted first, then offered Zara his hand. After a brief hesitation, she accepted his help, her fingers trembling slightly in his grasp as she slid from Thunder's back. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a plump, gray-haired woman with a weathered face and kind eyes. Rhett Hawkins, she called out, wiping her hands on her apron. You're early this month. I wasn't expecting the mail until next week. Special delivery, Mrs. Sullivan, Rhett replied with an easy smile. This is Miss Zara Jennings. She's in need of lodging, and I thought of you straight away. Mrs. Sullivan's shrewd gaze took in Zara's disheveled appearance, the fear in her eyes, and the protective way Rhett stood beside her. Understanding passed across the older woman's face. Well, you've come to the right place, she said, stepping back from the doorway. I've got stew on the stove and a spare room that's going unused. Come in, both of you. Inside, the house was modest but immaculately clean, with simple furniture and hand-stitched quilts adding splashes of color. The aroma of beef stew and freshly baked bread filled the air, causing Zara's stomach to growl audibly. She blushed, but Mrs. Sullivan merely chuckled. Best compliment a cook can get, the widow said, leading them to a scrubbed wooden table. Sit yourselves down. Food's ready. As Mrs. Sullivan served the meal, Rhett explained how he had found Zara and their agreement about potential work in exchange for lodging. The older woman listened without interruption, occasionally glancing at Zara with compassionate eyes. Well, I could certainly use the help, Mrs. Sullivan said when Rhett finished. Getting harder to keep up with everything on my own. Room and board in exchange for cooking and cleaning seems fair. How are you with a needle, girl? Reasonably skilled, Zara replied cautiously. My mother taught me fine stitching and mending. Mrs. Sullivan nodded approvingly. Good. I take in mending from folks in town. Extra pair of hands would let me accept more work. She turned to Rhett. You staying the night as well? Got space in the barn if you don't want to ride back to your cabin in the dark. Rhett glanced at Zara, who was focused intently on her stew. "I'd be obliged, Mrs. Sullivan. Been a long day on the trail." After supper, Mrs. Sullivan showed Zara to a small but clean bedroom at the back of the house, while Rhett went to settle Thunder in the barn. Later, as he spread his bedroll on a pile of fresh hay, he found himself staring at the ceiling, thoughts circling back to the mysterious woman sleeping in the house. There was something about Zara Jennings that intrigued him beyond the circumstances of their meeting. A quiet dignity despite her obvious fear, intelligence in those unusual amber-flecked eyes, and a sadness that seemed to run deeper than her current troubles. Rhett tried to dismiss these thoughts as simple curiosity, but he knew himself better than that. It had been a long time since a woman had captured his interest so immediately. Not since Caroline, and that had ended in heartbreak when she'd chosen a prosperous shopkeeper over a wandering mailman with an uncertain future. "Getting ahead of yourself, Hawkins," he muttered, punching his saddle that served as a pillow. Zara Jennings was clearly running from something serious. The last thing she needed was unwanted attention from another man, even one with honorable intentions. With that firmly in mind, Rhett rolled onto his side and willed himself to sleep, pushing away the memory of Zara's tentative smile when he'd offered her breakfast that morning. Dawn came with the crow of a rooster and the sounds of the Sullivan household stirring to life. Rhett emerged from the barn to find Zara already at work, helping Mrs. Sullivan gather eggs from the chicken coop. She wore a borrowed dress that hung loose on her slender frame, but the night's rest had brought color back to her cheeks. "Morning," Rhett called, approaching the water pump to wash away the night's sleep. Both women looked up, but it was Zara's smile that caught his attention, still cautious but genuine. "Good morning, Mr. Hawkins," she replied. "Back to Mr. Hawkins, are we?" He teased gently, splashing cold water on his face. A blush touched her cheeks. "Rhett," she amended softly. Mrs. Sullivan glanced between them with a knowing expression that made Rhett suddenly very interested in thoroughly drying his face with his bandana. Breakfast was a hearty affair of eggs, bacon, and biscuits with honey. As they ate, Rhett explained his plans for the day. "Need to deliver the mail to town, then head up to the Morales ranch. Won't be back this way for at least a week. You have a route?" Zara asked, curiosity evident in her voice. Rhett nodded. "Circle through the outlying ranches and mines, then back to Manassas. Take letters and packages both ways. Some folks only see me once a month. I'm their only connection to the outside world." "It sounds like important work," Zara observed. "Someone's got to do it," Rhett replied with a modest shrug. "And I prefer the open country to town living." After breakfast, Rhett readied Thunder for departure, securing his mail bags and checking her shoes for the journey ahead. He was tightening the cinch when he sensed Zara's presence behind him. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Rhett turned, surprised by her proximity. "No need for thanks, just did what anyone would do." Zara shook her head. "No, they wouldn't. Most would have chased me off or worse." Her eyes met his, unflinching now. "You're a good man, Rhett Hawkins." Something in her direct gaze made his heart quicken. "I try to be," he said simply. "Will you?" She hesitated, seemingly struggling with her next words. "Will you come back?" "To check on me, I mean." Rhett smiled, touched by her request. "I always stop by Mrs. Sullivan's on my rounds. Best food between here and Denver." He paused, then added more seriously, "But yes, I'll check on you. You'll be safe with Mrs. Sullivan, though. She's tougher than she looks, keeps a shotgun under her bed and knows how to use it." Relief washed over Zara's face. "Thank you." On impulse, Rhett reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small pocket knife with a bone handle. "Take this," he said, offering it to her. "It's not much, but it might make you feel safer." Zara accepted the knife with evident surprise. "I can't take your knife." Got others, he assured her. That one was my spare anyway. Their fingers brushed as she took the knife, and Rhett felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. Judging by the widening of Zara's eyes, she'd felt it too. I should go, he said, suddenly feeling awkward. Mail won't deliver itself. Zara stepped back, tucking the knife into the pocket of her borrowed dress. Safe travels, Rhett. He mounted Thunder, tipping his hat to Zara and Mrs. Sullivan, who had emerged from the house to see him off. Ladies, he said by way of farewell, then turned his horse toward town, resisting the urge to look back until he was well down the road. When he did glance back, Zara was still standing by the gate, her figure growing smaller with distance. Something about the image stayed with him as he rode into Manasseh to begin his deliveries. The weeks that followed settled into an unexpected pattern. Rhett found reasons to pass by Mrs. Sullivan's more frequently than his route strictly required, each visit revealing a Zara who seemed to grow stronger and more confident. The haunted look in her eyes gradually faded, though it never disappeared entirely. Under Mrs. Sullivan's practical guidance, Zara proved herself invaluable. Her fine needlework brought in additional mending orders from town, and she revealed a talent for baking that quickly became the talk of Manasseh. By her third week, folks were placing orders for Zara's apple pies and cinnamon bread. Rhett watched this transformation with growing admiration, and something deeper that he was reluctant to name. Each visit found him lingering longer, sharing meals and evenings on Mrs. Sullivan's porch, where Zara gradually revealed fragments of her past. She came from St. Louis, she told him one evening as they shelled peas together. Her mother had died when she was 16, leaving her in the care of an indifferent aunt who had been quick to marry her off at 18 to a man nearly twice her age. Edgar Jennings, she said, the name falling from her lips like a stone. A respected businessman with a fine house and impressive connections. And a monster behind closed doors, Rhett guessed quietly, noting how her hands trembled at the mention of her husband. Zara nodded, her eyes fixed on the peas in her lap. He was controlling. At first it was small things, criticizing my appearance, monitoring my conversations with others, limiting my time away from home. Her voice grew softer. Then it became physical, when I disappointed him. When I spoke to another man, when dinner wasn't to his liking. Rhett's hand stilled, anger building in his chest. That's why you ran. Partly, Zara admitted. 3 months ago I discovered I was with child. Her hand moved unconsciously to her still flat stomach. Edgar's rage when I told him. I feared for the baby's life and my own. She looked up at Rhett, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. So I waited until he left on a business trip, took what little money I had saved and fled west. The revelation of her pregnancy stunned Rhett momentarily. He searched Zara's face, finding fear and vulnerability there, but also determination. He'll come looking, Rhett said finally, Zara's chin lifted slightly. I know, but I couldn't stay. Not anymore. Without thinking, Rhett reached across the space between them, covering her hand with his own. You did the right thing, he said firmly. And you're not alone anymore. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. After a moment, Zara turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining briefly before she gently withdrew. Thank you, she whispered, returning to her task with renewed focus. That night, riding back to his small cabin in the hills outside Manasseh, Rhett confronted the truth he'd been avoiding. He was falling in love with Zara Jennings, a married woman carrying another man's child, a woman with a dangerous past that might well catch up to her. Fool, he muttered to himself as Thunder picked her way along the moonlit trail. Always did have a talent for impossible situations. Yet he couldn't deny the way his heart lifted whenever he saw Zara, or the dreams that had begun to feature her smile and the sound of her laughter. Nor could he ignore the protective instinct that grew stronger with each revelation about her husband. Edgar Jennings might be a respected businessman in St. Louis, but if he ever showed his face in Colorado territory, he'd find Rhett Hawkins waiting, and the former cavalry soldier hadn't forgotten how to fight. June bloomed across the Colorado landscape, painting the hills with wildflowers and bringing longer, warmer days. Zara's presence in Manassas had become an accepted part of the small community's fabric, her baked goods now a regular fixture at church socials and town gatherings. Mrs. Sullivan introduced her as a widowed niece, a fiction Zara maintained with quiet dignity. Only Rhett knew the truth, a shared secret that strengthened the bond between them. His visits to Mrs. Sullivan's house became such a regular occurrence that the widow took to setting an extra plate for dinner whenever Thunder's distinctive hoofbeats approached. "That mail carrier of yours is sweet on you," Mrs. Sullivan observed one afternoon as she and Zara hung washing in the yard. Zara nearly dropped the sheet she was pinning. "He's not my mail carrier," she protested, heat rising to her cheeks. Mrs. Sullivan chuckled. "Could have fooled me. Man's rearranged his entire route to pass by here twice a week instead of once a month." The older woman's eyes softened. "And I've seen how you watch the road on the days he's due." Unable to deny the accusation, Zara focused intently on straightening the sheet. "It's complicated, Mrs. Sullivan. Call me Agnes, dear. After 3 months I think we're past formalities." The widow handed her another clothespin. "And life's always complicated. Question is whether he makes you happy." Zara considered the question seriously. Did Rhett make her happy? The answer was undeniably yes. His visits had become the bright spots in her week, his stories of the trail, the small gifts he occasionally brought, wildflowers, a ribbon, once a book of poetry he'd traded for in a limosa. And most of all, the way he looked at her. Not as property or a possession, the way Edgar had, but as a person of value. "He does," she admitted softly. "But I'm still married in the eyes of the law, and there's the baby to consider." Her pregnancy was beginning to show now, a gentle swell beneath her dresses that could no longer be mistaken for anything else. The town accepted the story of a young widow expecting her late husband's child, but Zara knew the reality was far more complex. Mrs. Sullivan Agnes nodded thoughtfully. "Law's one thing, right and wrong's another. That husband of yours gave up any claim to you the first time he raised his hand." She pinned up the last of the washing with efficient movements. "As for the child, seems to me a good man who chooses to be a father is worth more than a bad one who happens to share blood." The wisdom in the older woman's words stayed with Zara throughout the day, tumbling through her mind as she kneaded bread and swept floors. By evening, when Rhett's arrival coincided with a summer thunderstorm that forced him to accept Agnes's offer of the spare room instead of the barn, Zara found herself at a crossroads. After dinner, when Agnes retired early with complaints of an aching hip, Zara and Rhett found themselves alone in the small parlor. Rain lashed against the windows, and occasional thunder punctuated the comfortable silence between them. "Your route must be difficult in weather like this," Zara observed, her hands busy with mending one of Agnes's quilts. Rhett nodded, relaxing in the chair opposite her. "Creeks flood, trails wash out. Had to swim thunder across Miller's Creek last spring when the bridge collapsed." His eyes crinkled with humor. "Mail got a bit damp, but I delivered it." "You take your responsibilities seriously," she said with a smile. "Try to," he replied, his expression growing more thoughtful. "Though I've been thinking lately that maybe it's time for a change." Zara's hand stilled. "What kind of change?" Rhett leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Been saving for a while now. There's land for sale just north of town, good pasture, some timber, even a small creek running through it. Previous owner started building a house but had to move back east when his wife took ill. You're thinking of settling down? Zara asked, surprised. She had always imagined Rhett as a man who needed the freedom of the open trail. Been on the move since the war ended, he said quietly. Maybe it's time to put down roots. His eyes met hers, intent and serious. Postmaster in Alamosa mentioned they're looking for someone to take over the Manassas post office. Would mean giving up the outlying route, but staying in one place. Something in his tone made Zara's heart beat faster. That sounds like a significant change, she managed to say. Would be, he agreed, but might have its advantages. He hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation. For one thing, I could see certain people more than twice a week. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken meaning. Zara set aside her mending, suddenly finding it hard to breathe normally. Rhett, she began, unsure what she intended to say. A particularly loud crack of thunder startled them both, followed immediately by a brilliant flash of lightning that illuminated the room in harsh white light. The lamps flickered, then steadied. Storm's right overhead, Rhett observed, moving to the window to secure the shutters more tightly. Zara watched him, struck by the domesticity of the moment, Rhett ensuring their safety. The cozy warmth of the room contrasting with the wild weather outside, the easy familiarity that had grown between them over the past months. I've been thinking about what happens when the baby comes, she said suddenly. Rhett turned from the window, his expression carefully neutral. You worried about staying with Agnes. She seems mighty taken with the idea of having an infant in the house. It's not that, Zara replied, gathering her courage. It's after. What kind of life we'll have? What kind of future? Rhett returned to his chair, his movements deliberately measured. What kind of future do you want, Zara? The directness of his question demanded equal honesty. One where I'm not afraid, she said softly. Where my child can grow up knowing kindness rather than cruelty, where I might find. She faltered, then finished in almost a whisper, happiness. You deserve all that and more, Rhett said, his voice rough with emotion. Zara looked up, meeting his gaze directly. When I'm with you, I can imagine that future. The confession hung between them, changing everything and nothing all at once. Rhett remained still, as if afraid any movement might break the moment's fragility. Zara, he finally said, her name a question and prayer combined. Are you saying what I think you're saying? She nodded, unable to retreat now that she'd found her courage. I know it's impossible. I'm still legally bound to Edgar. The baby complicates everything. But when I'm with you, I feel safe, valued. She took a deep breath. I feel loved even if you've never said the words. Rhett moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. I haven't said them because I didn't think I had the right, he admitted. But they've been in my heart since that morning I found you sleeping beside Thunder. His thumbs traced circles on her palms. I love you, Zara Jennings. Whatever complications that brings, whatever obstacles we face, that truth doesn't change. Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks. I love you too, she whispered, and it terrifies me. Rhett reached up to gently brush away her tears. We'll figure it out, together, one step at a time. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the small parlor, a different kind of lightning had struck, equally powerful, equally transformative, but bringing promise rather than destruction. As the summer progressed into early autumn, Rhett made good on his plans. He purchased the land north of town, spending his days off from mail delivery working on the partially built house. Zara often joined him, packing lunches and offering design suggestions as the structure gradually took shape. Despite the propriety they maintained in public, never touching beyond what friendship would allow, never acknowledging the deeper feelings between them, these days on the property felt like glimpses into a possible future. The situation remained complicated. Zara was still legally married, her pregnancy advancing visibly with each passing week. Rhett continued his mail route, though he had begun training a young man named Thomas to take over the outlying deliveries in preparation for his transition to the Manassas post office position. Then, in late September, everything changed. Rhett arrived at Agnes Sullivan's house one evening to find both women ashen-faced at the kitchen table, a letter spread between them. "What's happened?" he asked, instantly alert to the tension in the room. Zara looked up, fear evident in her expression. "He's found me," she whispered, pushing the letter toward Rhett. The paper was expensive, the handwriting precise and controlled much like its author, Rhett imagined. Edgar Jennings wrote that he had traced his wayward wife to Manassas, Colorado, and would be arriving within the fortnight to reclaim what is rightfully his, including the child Zara carried, which he claimed as his property and heir. The letter had been sent to Agnes Sullivan directly, indicating that Edgar had somehow discovered exactly where Zara was staying. Who could have told him? Agnes wondered, her normally unflappable demeanor shaken. "We've been so careful." "Doesn't matter now," Rhett said, his mind racing through possibilities. "What matters is keeping Zara safe." "He'll come with the law on his side," Zara said dully. "A husband has rights to his wife and child. No court would side with me." Rhett pulled up a chair beside her. "Then we don't let it get to court," he said firmly. "Zara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." He waited until she nodded before continuing. "Is there any possibility of reconciliation with Edgar, any part of you that might want to return to that life?" "No," she replied without hesitation, her hand protectively covering her swollen belly. "I would rather die than go back to him, rather die than let my child be raised by that monster." Rhett nodded, having expected this answer but needing to hear it confirmed. "Then we have to leave, tonight." Agnes gasped. "Leave? But where would you go?" "Her condition makes travel difficult but not impossible," Rhett finished. "I have a friend in Wyoming, Samuel Reynolds, former cavalry like me but Union side, runs a ranch near Cheyenne. We'd be safe there until—" He looked at Zara, letting the implications hang unspoken. "Until the baby comes," she said softly. "And then—" Rhett took her hand, no longer concerned with propriety. "And then we figure out the next step, together like we promised." Agnes watched them with shrewd eyes. "You two have discussed this before." "Not running away specifically," Zara admitted, "but a future, somehow." The older woman nodded, coming to a decision. "You'll need supplies, food, warm clothes." She stood with surprising energy. "Rhett, how soon can you be ready?" "An hour," he replied. "Need to pack some things from my cabin, saddle the horses." "You have a second horse?" Zara asked. "Bought a mare last month," Rhett said. "She's gentle, good for a rider in your condition." Understanding dawned on Zara's face. "You've been planning for this possibility." "Hoping it wouldn't come to it," he corrected, "but unwilling to be unprepared if it did." Agnes was already moving around the kitchen, packing bread, dried meat, and other provisions into a canvas sack. "I'll add some of my medicine," she said briskly. "Herbs for the journey. And money I've saved a fair bit over the years." "We can't take your savings," Zara protested. Agnes fixed her with a stern look. "Consider it a loan, then, or an investment in that grandchild you're carrying." Her expression softened. "You're the daughter I never had, Zara. Let me help you." Tears welled in Zara's eyes as she embraced the older woman. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." An hour later, under cover of darkness, Rhett and Zara left Manasseh. They traveled light 2 horses, essential supplies, and the small bundle of possessions Zara had accumulated during her months with Agnes. The stars provided enough light to follow the trail north, away from town, and toward the distant Wyoming territory. Zara rode the gentle bay mare Rhett had purchased, her pregnancy making the journey uncomfortable but not impossible. At 7 months along, her body had adapted to the changes, though they both knew they needed to reach Cheyenne before the baby's arrival became imminent. They avoided main roads and towns, camping in sheltered locations and moving primarily at night when possible. Rhett's years as a mail carrier had given him intimate knowledge of the territory's hidden trails and obscure passages, knowledge that now served them well as they evaded potential pursuit. On their 3rd night, camped in a protected hollow beside a small stream, Zara finally asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "What happens when we reach Wyoming?" she said, watching Rhett build their fire. "Your friend will shelter us, but then what? Edgar won't simply give up. As long as I'm his wife under the law, he has rights to me and the baby." Rhett sat beside her on the blanket they'd spread near the fire. "I've been thinking about that," he admitted. "There are options. None perfect, but possibilities." "Tell me," she urged. "Divorce is one," he began. "Some territories have more progressive laws than others. Wyoming, for instance, was the first to grant women the right to vote. Their divorce laws might be more sympathetic to your situation." Zara nodded, considering this. "But that would take time, legal proceedings." "Edgar would find us before it was complete." "True," Rhett acknowledged. "The other option is more unconventional." He hesitated, then continued, "We could go further west, California perhaps, or even Mexico, start over with new names, new identities." "As fugitives," Zara said quietly. "As a family," Rhett countered, taking her hand. "It's not ideal, I know, but sometimes freedom comes at a cost." Zara's free hand moved to her belly where the baby shifted restlessly. "What about your land, the post office position, everything you've worked for?" "Land can be sold," Rhett said simply. "Jobs can be replaced. You and the baby can't be." The depth of his commitment staggered her. "You would give up everything," she whispered, "for us." "In a heartbeat," he replied without hesitation. "Zara, I've wandered most of my life, never feeling like I belonged anywhere. With you, I've found home. That's worth any sacrifice." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she leaned against him. "I don't deserve such love." "You deserve far more than I can give," he corrected gently, his arm encircling her shoulders. "But I'll spend my life trying to be worthy of yours." In the flickering firelight, surrounded by wilderness and uncertainty, they found a moment of peace in each other's presence, a small oasis of hope in their desperate flight. The journey to Wyoming proved more arduous than anticipated. Early autumn storms brought cold rain and occasionally sleet, making travel miserable and forcing longer stays in makeshift shelters. Zara's pregnancy advanced, her discomfort growing with each passing day, though she never complained. Rhett watched her with increasing concern, noting the shadows beneath her eyes and the effort each morning's departure required. 2 weeks into their journey, they encountered another complication. Stopping in a tiny settlement to replenish supplies, Rhett overheard a conversation that sent a chill through him. A well-dressed man from St. Louis had passed through days earlier, asking questions about a pregnant woman traveling with a mail carrier. He'd offered a substantial reward for information. Edgar Jennings was closer than they'd thought, and apparently determined in his pursuit. That night, camped in a dense stand of pines, Rhett shared this news with Zara. "We need to change direction," he said, studying their crude map by lantern light. He's following the most direct route to Cheyenne, assuming that's where we're headed. Zara huddled closer to the small fire, her face pale with fatigue and worry. Where can we go instead? Rhett traced an alternate path on the map. West into the mountains, it's rougher terrain but less traveled, then north when we're past the search area. He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. It will add days to our journey. Do we have a choice? She asked simply. We always have choices, Rhett replied. Just not always good ones. The mountain route proved as challenging as Rhett had warned. Steep trails, thinning air, and plummeting nighttime temperatures tested their endurance. Game was plentiful, at least, allowing Rhett to supplement their provisions with fresh meat. Zara's pregnancy had reached its final stages, her body heavy and ungainly on the narrow trails. One evening, as they set up camp in a protected ravine, Zara suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her abdomen. "What is it?" Rhett asked, immediately at her side. "Pain," she admitted, her breath coming in short bursts. Sharp, then fading. Rhett helped her to sit on their bedroll, his expression grave. "How long has this been happening? Off and on through the day," she confessed. "I thought it was just the riding." "Early labor, most likely," he said, trying to keep his voice calm despite the fear gripping his heart. They were miles from any settlement, deep in unfamiliar mountain territory, with winter approaching and a determined pursuer somewhere behind them. "We need to find better shelter, somewhere you can rest properly." Zara nodded, her face contorted briefly as another pain seized her. When it passed, she looked up at Rhett with determined eyes. "I can continue for a while longer. The pains are still far apart." Rhett wanted to protest, but recognized the steel beneath her quiet exterior. Instead, he helped her to a more comfortable position and brought water from the nearby stream. "My mother was a midwife," Zara said suddenly. "Before she married my father, she taught me things when I was young. I know what to expect." Rhett squeezed her hand. "That's good, because I don't have the first idea about birthing babies." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You'll learn quickly, I suspect." The following day brought clearer weather and, mercifully, less frequent contractions. They traveled slowly, Rhett leading Zara's mare and constantly scanning the horizon for suitable shelter. By mid-afternoon, fortune finally smiled upon them in the form of an abandoned trapper's cabin nestled on a wooded slope. The structure was crude but solid, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough plank floor, and a roof that showed only minor leaks. Evidence suggested it had been uninhabited for at least a season, though someone had left a small stack of firewood beside the hearth. "This will do," Rhett said with obvious relief, helping Zara dismount. Inside, they found basic furnishings: a crude bed frame, a table with one chair, and shelves containing a few forgotten supplies. While Zara rested on the bed, now covered with their bedrolls, Rhett set about making the cabin habitable. He built a fire, secured the horses in a lean-to adjacent to the cabin, and hunted a rabbit for their evening meal. As night fell, Zara's contractions increased in frequency and intensity. Rhett boiled water, laid out clean cloths, and followed her instructions as best he could, fighting his own mounting anxiety. He had faced Confederate artillery and outlaws with less fear than he felt watching Zara struggle through each wave of pain. "Talk to me," she gasped during a brief respite between contractions. "Distract me." Rhett sat beside her, wiping her forehead with a damp cloth. "What should I talk about?" "The house," she said, managing a small smile. "Tell me about how you'll finish our house when this is all over." Understanding her need for hope for a future beyond their current crisis, Rhett began describing his plans for the property outside Manassas. How he would complete the second bedroom for the baby, the garden he envisioned for the southern exposure. the porch where they could sit on summer evenings, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. And a swing, Zara added weakly. For the baby. Absolutely, Rhett agreed, his throat tight with emotion. The finest swing in Colorado territory. Another contraction seized her then, more powerful than those before. Zara cried out, clutching Rhett's hand with surprising strength. When it passed, her eyes were wide with new urgency. "It's time," she whispered. What followed was the longest night of Rhett's life. Zara labored through the dark hours, her courage humbling him as she fought through pain that would have broken most men. He supported her as she insisted on standing through some contractions, wiped her brow when she collapsed in exhaustion, and spoke constant encouragement even when fear threatened to overwhelm him. Near dawn, as the first gray light filtered through the cabin's single window, Zara's efforts intensified. Following her gasped instructions, Rhett positioned himself to assist with the delivery, his hands trembling but determined. "I can see the head," he told her, awe replacing fear in that miraculous moment. "You're doing it, Zara, just a little more." With a final, powerful effort, Zara brought their child into the world, a robust boy with a shock of dark hair and lungs that immediately announced his arrival with an indignant wail. Rhett wrapped the infant in a clean shirt, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he placed the tiny bundle in Zara's arms. "He's perfect," he whispered, overcome by the intensity of love that surged through him at the sight of Zara holding the newborn. In that moment, biology became irrelevant. This was his son in every way that mattered. Zara looked up at him, exhaustion and joy mingled in her tear-streaked face. "Thank you," she said simply, the words encompassing far more than his assistance with the birth. Rhett pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, then to the downy head of the baby. "What shall we name him?" he asked. Zara studied the infant's face for a long moment. "Robert," she decided, "after my father, Robert Sullivan Hawkins." The surname she'd chosen, combining Agnes's name with his own, brought fresh tears to Rhett's eyes. It was a declaration of intention, of the family they were creating despite all obstacles. "Robert Sullivan Hawkins," he repeated softly, his finger caught in the newborn's surprisingly strong grip. "Welcome to the world, son." For 3 days, they remained in the trapper's cabin, Zara recovering her strength while Rhett cared for them both with tender solicitude. The baby proved healthy and vigorous, with a hearty appetite and what Rhett already recognized as a stubborn temperament. "Takes after his mother," he observed on the third evening, watching Zara nurse the infant by firelight. She smiled, the peaceful expression making her more beautiful than ever despite the ordeal she'd recently endured. "Poor child." Rhett moved to sit beside them on the bed, his arm encircling Zara's shoulders. "Lucky child," he corrected. "To have you for his mother." Outside, snow had begun to fall, the first significant storm of the approaching winter. The knowledge that they couldn't remain indefinitely in the cabin weighed on both of them, though neither voiced the concern aloud. Their supplies would last perhaps another week, and Edgar Jennings remained a threat somewhere beyond the mountains. On the fourth morning, as Rhett returned from checking the horses, he spotted a rider approaching through the falling snow. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle propped beside the door. "Stay inside," he told Zara tersely. "Keep the baby quiet if you can." Heart pounding, he positioned himself on the cabin's small porch, rifle ready but not yet raised. The approaching figure gradually took shape through the swirling snow, a single rider on a sturdy mountain pony, dressed for the weather in heavy furs. Not Edgar Jennings, Rhett realized with relief, but perhaps one of his hired men. "That's far enough," Rhett called when the rider came within hailing distance. "State your business." The man reined his horse to a stop, raising empty hands to show he meant no harm. "Name's McAllister," he called back. "Jim McAllister. This is my trapping cabin you're occupying." Rhett lowered the rifle slightly, though he remained wary. "Sorry for the intrusion. My wife was in labor, needed shelter urgently." The trapper's weathered face showed immediate concern. "The lady and child doing all right?" "They're well, thank you," Rhett replied, his stance relaxing slightly at the genuine concern in the man's voice. "We'll be moving on as soon as weather permits." McAllister dismounted, leading his pony closer. He was an older man, perhaps in his 60s, with a grizzled beard and kind eyes in a sun-weathered face. "No need to rush on my account," he said. "Been staying with my daughter's family down in the valley. Just came up to check my lines and gather some supplies." He studied Rhett thoughtfully. "You folks in some kind of trouble? Don't often find new parents this deep in the high country." Rhett hesitated, weighing the risk of honesty against the possibility that this stranger might help them. Something in McAllister's direct gaze decided him. "My wife's first husband is pursuing us," he said carefully. "A dangerous man who means us harm." McAllister nodded, unsurprised. "Figured it was something like that. You got a destination in mind?" "Wyoming," Rhett replied. "I have a friend near Cheyenne who'll help us." The trapper considered this, glancing at the thickening snowfall. "That's a fair piece through difficult country, especially with a newborn." He gestured toward a path leading down the mountain. "My daughter and her husband run a way station about 15 miles down this trail. Stage stops there twice a week on the route to Laramie. Would get you within 30 miles of Cheyenne, and you could travel in relative comfort." The offer seemed providential, though Rhett remained cautious. "Why would you help us?" McAllister's expression turned somber. "Lost my own daughter to a brutal husband years back, before I could get to her." He met Rhett's eyes directly. "Won't stand by and see it happen to another woman if I can help it." Inside the cabin, baby Robert began to cry. Rhett glanced back at the door, then made his decision. "We'd be grateful for your assistance, Mr. McAllister." The trapper nodded once. "I'll stay the night, help you prepare. Can leave at first light if the snow lets up." He extended his hand, which Rhett shook firmly. "And it's just Jim." "Figure we're beyond formalities when you're birthing babies in my cabin." With Jim McAllister's assistance, their journey transformed. The trapper knew the mountain paths intimately, leading them through passages Rhett would never have discovered alone. He shared his food supplies generously, and showed remarkable tenderness toward Zara and the baby, fashioning a sling that allowed the infant to be carried securely against his mother's chest during travel. 2 days of careful descent brought them to the way station. Jim had mentioned a sturdy log structure nestled in a protected valley. Hannah McAllister Davis, Jim's daughter, proved as kind as her father, welcoming the unexpected guests with genuine warmth. Her husband Martin, a former Army scout, took one look at their situation and immediately offered his assistance in planning the next stage of their journey. "Stage is due tomorrow," he told them over dinner that evening. "Runs all the way to Laramie. From there, it's a simple matter to reach Cheyenne." Zara, looking stronger after 2 nights in a proper bed, bounced Robert gently on her lap. "What about Edgar, if he's been asking questions along the main routes?" Martin exchanged a glance with his father-in-law. "Jim told me about your situation. I served with the territorial marshals for a spell before settling here. Still have contacts." He leaned forward, lowering his voice though there was no one else in the room. "Way I see it, you folks need legal protection more than hiding." "Wyoming might be the answer." Rhett raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "Wyoming territory grants women more rights than anywhere else in the Union," Martin explained. including divorce on grounds of cruelty with no need for the husband's presence or consent. Hope flickered in Zara's eyes. "Is that true?" Hannah nodded, joining the conversation. Mary Edwards was in a similar situation last year. Court granted her divorce and full custody of her children in less than a month. "And in the meantime?" Rhett asked, the practical concerns foremost in his mind. "In the meantime," Martin continued, "you'd have the protection of being within jurisdiction of a court that's already sympathetic to the wife's position. Any attempt by your former husband to force you to return with him could be countered with a legal filing." It seemed almost too perfect a solution that offered legitimacy rather than endless hiding. Yet Rhett remained cautious, aware that Edgar Jennings had resources and determination on his side. What if he follows us to Wyoming, hires lawyers, brings witnesses to counter Zara's claims? Martin smiled grimly. Let him try. Wyoming folks don't take kindly to men who abuse women. He'd find the deck stacked against him from the start. That night, as Robert slept peacefully in a makeshift cradle, Rhett and Zara discussed their options in the privacy of the small room Hannah had prepared for them. "What do you think?" Zara asked, her hand finding his beneath the blankets. Rhett considered carefully before answering. "It's a risk either way. Continuing to run means always looking over our shoulders, never establishing roots. Facing this legally in Wyoming means confrontation, but with the possibility of true freedom afterward." "Freedom," Zara repeated softly, the word carrying immense weight. "To live openly. To be your wife in truth, not just in our hearts." She turned to face him in the darkness. "I want that, Rhett. I want Robert to have a father he can be proud of, not a secret." Rhett pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of her still healing body. "Then Wyoming it is," he murmured against her hair. "And whatever comes, we face it together." The stage arrived the following afternoon, a mud-splattered Concorde coach driven by a taciturn man named Wilson, who asked no questions when Martin explained that the small family needed passage to Laramie. The other passengers, a traveling salesman and an elderly couple returning from visiting relatives, showed similar discretion, though the older woman offered experienced advice about traveling with an infant. Bidding farewell to the McAllisters proved unexpectedly emotional. Jim pressed a small buckskin pouch into Rhett's hand before they departed. "Gold dust," he explained gruffly. "Not much, but enough to help you get established." When Rhett tried to refuse, the older man shook his head firmly. "Consider it payment for taking care of my cabin," he insisted. "Besides, that boy of yours is going to need things. Babies are expensive, as I recall." Hannah embraced Zara warmly, slipping a folded paper into her pocket. "My cousin Elizabeth lives in Cheyenne," she whispered. "That's her address. She's married to an attorney who specializes in women's legal matters. Seek her out when you arrive." These final kindnesses nearly overwhelmed Zara, who had grown unaccustomed to such generosity during her years with Edgar. As the stage pulled away, she waved until the way station disappeared around a bend in the road, Robert sleeping soundly in the sling across her chest. "We've been blessed," she said quietly to Rhett, "with friends we never knew we had." "That's the real West," he replied, his arm secure around her shoulders as the coach swayed along the rutted road. "Not the gunfights and outlaws that make the dime novels. It's people helping each other survive in harsh country." The journey to Laramie took 2 days, with overnight stops at rustic way stations similar to the McAllisters. Despite the uncomfortable conditions, Zara found herself enjoying the adventure now that immediate danger seemed less pressing. Robert proved a surprisingly good traveler, sleeping through much of the jolting ride and charming their fellow passengers during stops. From Laramie, they took a smaller local stage to Cheyenne, arriving as the first snow of winter dusted Wyoming's capital city. The growing settlement impressed them both with its orderly streets and substantial buildings, evidence of its importance as both the territorial capital and a major stop on the Union Pacific Railroad. Following Hannah's advice, they sought out Elizabeth Cooper, who welcomed them into her comfortable home on the outskirts of town. Her husband James, a serious man with intelligent eyes, listened carefully to their story that evening after dinner, taking occasional notes in a small leather book. "Your situation is not uncommon, Mrs. Jennings," he said when Zara finished her account. "Wyoming Territory has explicitly designed its laws to protect women in circumstances like yours." He glanced at his notes. "I believe we have solid grounds for divorce, custody of the child, and potentially even a restraining order against your husband should he attempt to approach you." "How long would the process take?" Rhett asked, his hand resting protectively on Zara's shoulder. "Typically, 2 to 3 months," James replied. "However, given the circumstances, particularly the documented history of abuse and the infant's welfare, I might petition the court for an expedited hearing." "And in the meantime?" Zara asked, voicing the concern that had haunted her throughout their journey. "Edgar has resources, connections. He won't simply give up." Elizabeth spoke up from where she sat cradling Robert. "You'll stay with us, of course. Our home is large enough, and James's position in the community offers a certain protection." She exchanged a meaningful glance with her husband. "Besides, Edgar Jennings would be foolish to attempt anything unlawful in a town where the territorial marshal is James's former classmate at Harvard Law." The offer of sanctuary brought tears to Zara's eyes. After months of uncertainty and fear, the prospect of safety, of legitimate legal protection, seemed almost too fortunate to believe. "We can't impose," she began, but Elizabeth waved away her protest. "Nonsense. We have the space, and I've been longing for a baby to fuss over until we're blessed with our own." She smiled warmly at Zara. "Besides, James works too much. Having company will force him to come home at a reasonable hour for dinner." The attorney chuckled good-naturedly at his wife's teasing. "In all seriousness," he added, turning to Rhett, "your presence would also be welcome. I understand from your account that you've essentially been acting as Miss Jennings's protector, and now consider yourself father to her child." Rhett nodded, his expression solemn. "That's correct." "Then I should inform you," James continued, "that once the divorce is granted, there would be no legal impediment to the two of you marrying, should that be your wish. In fact, from a strategic perspective, having a respectable husband waiting to provide for both mother and child would strengthen our case considerably." Hope expanded in Rhett's chest, a future taking tangible shape after months of uncertainty. "I've wished to marry Zara since, shortly after we met," he said simply. "Nothing would make me happier than to make that possible legally." Zara's hand found his, squeezing tightly. "And nothing would make me happier than to be your wife," she whispered. The words meant for him alone despite their audience. James nodded, satisfied. "Excellent. Then we'll begin preparations immediately. I'll file the initial paperwork tomorrow." That night, settled in the Coopers' comfortable guest room with Robert sleeping peacefully in a borrowed cradle, Rhett and Zara allowed themselves to truly believe in the possibility of their future together. For the first time since fleeing Manasseh, they spoke openly of their hopes, the house they would build, the family they would raise, the life they would create. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness," Zara confessed, nestled against Rhett's side in the darkness. "After Edgar, I believed my only choice was between submission and solitude." Rhett pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. And I never thought I'd find someone who made me want to stop wandering." His arm tightened around her shoulders. "Seems we saved each other." "Robert saved us both," she replied softly, glancing toward the cradle. "Gave me the courage to leave. Gave you a family." "That he did," Rhett agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'll spend my life making sure he never regrets it." The peaceful interlude extended through Christmas, which they celebrated quietly with the Coopers. James filed the divorce petition before the courts closed for the holiday, ensuring it would be among the first cases heard in the new year. Elizabeth proved a generous hostess and became a dear friend to Zara, introducing her to a circle of Cheyenne women who embraced the newcomer with compassionate understanding. Rhett found work at a local livery stable, his expertise with horses quickly earning the owner's respect. The arrangement allowed him to contribute to their keep, while remaining close enough to respond if Edgar Jennings should appear. In quiet moments, he wrote letters to Agnes Sullivan in Manassas, explaining their situation and promising to visit when circumstances allowed. To Samuel Reynolds, his cavalry friend whose ranch they had originally intended to reach, and to the Manassas postmaster, relinquishing his claim on the position he'd once coveted. January brought bitterly cold weather to Cheyenne, but also progress in their legal battle. James Cooper's petition for an expedited hearing was granted, with the court date set for early February. Their optimism grew as supporting documents arrived, a letter from Agnes Sullivan testifying to Zara's condition upon reaching Manassas. Medical records from a Cheyenne doctor documenting scars consistent with past abuse. Character references from respected citizens who had come to know Rhett and Zara during their time in Wyoming. Then, 2 weeks before the scheduled hearing, the threat they had been dreading finally materialized. Edgar Jennings arrived in Cheyenne on the eastbound train, accompanied by an attorney from St. Louis, and 2 men whose appearance suggested they were hired muscle rather than legal assistants. James Cooper received word of their arrival within hours, thanks to his network of informants throughout the town. That evening he called Rhett and Zara into his study, his expression grave. "Jennings has taken rooms at the Cheyenne house," he informed them. "He's already filed a counter-petition with the court, claiming his wife is mentally unstable and was coerced into leaving him. He's demanding her immediate return to his custody, along with the child." Zara paled, her hand instinctively seeking Rhett's. "He can't take Robert," she whispered. "I won't let him." "Nor will the court," James assured her firmly. "Wyoming law strongly favors maternal custody, especially for infants. However, we must be prepared for aggressive tactics. Jennings strikes me as a man unaccustomed to being denied what he wants." "What should we do?" Rhett asked, his mind already calculating potential escape routes should legal protections fail. "For now, stay within the house and grounds," James advised. "I've arranged for additional security. Some trusted men will watch the property day and night until the hearing. Elizabeth will remain with Zara when you're at work, Rhett." The precautions seemed reasonable, though the newfound confinement chafed after their recent freedom. Days passed in tense anticipation, each knock at the door or unusual sound in the night triggering momentary panic. Then, 3 days before the scheduled hearing, disaster struck from an unexpected quarter. Robert, now nearly 2 months old and previously healthy, developed a raspy cough that quickly deteriorated into alarming respiratory distress. By midnight, the infant was burning with fever, his tiny chest heaving with the effort to breathe. "We need the doctor," Elizabeth declared, her usual composure shaken by the baby's rapid decline. "Immediately." Rhett volunteered to go, reluctant to leave Zara, but knowing he could move faster through the snow-covered streets. James accompanied him, both men armed despite the attorney's usual aversion to firearms. They returned within the hour with Dr. Peterson, an elderly physician who had become their friend during previous consultations. The doctor examined Robert with grave concentration, his experienced hands gentle but thorough as he listened to the baby's labored breathing. "Pneumonia," he diagnosed finally, straightening from the cradle with a troubled expression, moving quickly as it often does in infants. "What can we do?" Zara asked, terror evident in her voice. "Keep him warm. Steam in the room to ease his breathing. I'll leave medicine for the fever." The doctor hesitated, then added with gentle honesty, "The next 24 hours will be critical. If he makes it through the night, his chances improve substantially." What followed was the most harrowing night since Robert's birth. Zara refused to leave his side, applying cool compresses to his fevered body and administering the doctor's medicine with meticulous care. Rhett maintained the fire at blazing heat, boiling water continuously to fill the room with steam. Elizabeth prepared broth and tea, while James maintained vigil at the windows, watching for any sign of threat from outside. By dawn, Robert's fever had risen further, his breathing becoming more labored despite their efforts. Dr. Peterson, summoned again, recommended a steam tent, a framework of chairs draped with sheets, creating a concentrated steam bath around the cradle. The treatment offered some relief, but the infant's condition remained precarious. "We need stronger medicine," the doctor admitted reluctantly. "I have more effective compounds at my office, but hesitated to use them given his age." He glanced at Zara's desperate face. "At this point, I believe the benefits outweigh the risks." "I'll go with you," James offered immediately. "No," Rhett countered. "Stay here with Zara and the baby." "I'll accompany the doctor." Outside, the January morning was bitterly cold, the streets nearly deserted in the early hour. Rhett and Dr. Peterson moved quickly toward the doctor's office near the town center, neither man speaking as they focused on the urgent task. They were within sight of their destination when Rhett's instincts, honed by years of frontier survival, alerted him to danger. Two men emerged from an alleyway ahead, their purposeful stance immediately triggering Rhett's alarm. He recognized them as the enforcers who had accompanied Edgar Jennings to Cheyenne. "Doc," he said quietly, "when I give the word, head straight for your office. Don't look back." The elderly physician glanced at him sharply, then at the approaching men, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The baby needs that medicine, Hawkins. Within the hour, he'll get it," Rhett promised, his hand moving to the revolver beneath his coat. "Go, now." As Dr. Peterson hurried toward his office, the two men moved to intercept Rhett, spreading out to block potential escape routes. Behind them, a third figure appeared, Edgar Jennings himself, immaculately dressed despite the early hour, his refined appearance belying the cruelty Rhett knew lurked beneath the surface. "Mr. Hawkins, I presume," Jennings called, his cultured voice carrying in the still morning air. "The mail carrier who has taken such an interest in my wife and child." Rhett stood his ground, keeping his expression neutral despite the rage boiling within him at finally facing the man who had terrorized Zara. "Mr. Jennings," he acknowledged coldly. "I believe we have matters to discuss," Jennings continued, approaching with deliberate steps while his men maintained their flanking positions. "Regarding the return of my property." The choice of words property rather than family confirmed everything Zara had told Rhett about this man's character. "Your wife has filed for divorce," he replied evenly. "The court will decide the matter in 3 days." A thin smile crossed Jennings' face. "Courts can be unpredictable." "I prefer more direct resolutions," he gestured to his companions. These gentlemen will escort you to a private location where we can discuss terms for Zara's voluntary return to St. Louis." "There are no terms," Rhett stated flatly. "Zara doesn't want to see you, ever again." Anger flashed across Jennings' carefully composed features. "What my wife wants is irrelevant. She belongs to me, as does the child." His voice hardened. "I'm prepared to be generous, Hawkins. $5,000 for you to disappear, a considerable sum for a man of your station." The insulting offer nearly provoked Rhett to violence, but he controlled himself, aware that any confrontation would delay getting the medicine Robert so desperately needed. "Not interested," he replied curtly, starting to move past the group toward the doctor's office. One of Jennings' men stepped directly into his path, hand moving meaningfully toward the weapon concealed beneath his coat. "This doesn't have to get ugly," Jennings said, his tone conveying that he would actually prefer if it did. "Simply tell me where my wife is staying, accept my generous offer, and we can all proceed with our day." Rhett assessed the situation with the clarity that came from numerous dangerous encounters. 3 against 1, in an empty street, with Robert's life hanging in the balance. Direct confrontation would be foolish. 5,000 is insultingly low, he said instead, feigning interest in negotiation. "For a man of your wealth, surely your wife and child are worth more." Surprise flickered across Jennings' face, followed by calculating assessment. "Perhaps we can discuss terms after all. My office is just down the street." "After I complete my current errand," Rhett countered, gesturing toward the doctor's building. "I have business with Dr. Peterson that can't wait." Jennings' eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What business?" "Medical supplies," Rhett replied vaguely. "I'll meet you at your office in 1 hour." For a tense moment it seemed Jennings might refuse, but then he nodded sharply. 1 hour. The Cattleman's Bank building, 2nd floor, he smiled thinly. "Don't disappoint me, Hawkins. My patience has limits." As the 3 men withdrew, Rhett released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The encounter had been unexpected. Jennings had obviously been watching the Cooper residence and followed him this morning. The implication was troubling, but Rhett pushed those concerns aside, focusing on the immediate priority of obtaining Robert's medicine. Dr. Peterson was waiting inside his office, already preparing the compounds needed for the baby's treatment. "Trouble?" he asked tersely, noting Rhett's expression. "Nothing I can't handle," Rhett assured him, though his mind was racing with contingency plans. "How quickly can you have that medicine ready?" "It's prepared," the doctor replied, handing over a small bottle. 4 drops every 3 hours in a teaspoon of warm water. If his fever hasn't broken by evening, increase to 5 drops. He fixed Rhett with a serious gaze. "And Hawkins, get that child out of Cheyenne. Jennings has been making inquiries all over town. It's only a matter of time before he discovers where you're staying." Rhett nodded grimly. "I know. We're working on it." The return to the Cooper residence was thankfully uneventful, though Rhett took a circuitous route and checked frequently for pursuit. Inside, he found the situation largely unchanged, Robert still burning with fever, Zara pale with exhaustion and fear, the Coopers maintaining their supportive vigil. As the doctor had instructed, they administered the stronger medicine, watching anxiously for any improvement in the infant's condition. Rhett took James aside, explaining his encounter with Jennings and the implications for their security. "He's getting desperate," James observed thoughtfully. "The hearing is only days away and our case is strong. He knows his chances of legal victory are slim." "Which makes him more dangerous," Rhett pointed out. "He's willing to use force to get what he wants." The attorney nodded soberly. "I'll speak with Marshal Bennett today, request additional protection." He glanced toward the bedroom where Zara sat with Robert. but I agree you should consider relocating until the hearing, somewhere Jennings won't think to look. Zara won't leave without Robert, and Robert can't be moved in his condition, Rhett replied, frustration evident in his voice. Then we strengthen our defenses here, James decided. I'll hire more men, make this house a fortress until the hearing. By midday, Robert's condition showed the first signs of improvement, his breathing slightly less labored, his fever marginally reduced. Zara, who had not slept in over 24 hours, finally succumbed to exhaustion, slumping in the rocking chair beside the cradle. Rhett covered her with a blanket, then took her place watching over their son. "You fight, little man," he whispered, gently stroking the baby's flushed cheek. "You're a Hawkins now, and we don't give up easy." The afternoon brought further gradual improvement, each dose of medicine seeming to strengthen Robert's tiny body in its battle against illness. By evening, his fever had broken, and his breathing, while still congested, had lost the frightening rattle that had so alarmed them. Dr. Peterson, visiting again at sunset, pronounced himself cautiously optimistic. "He's turned the corner," the elderly physician confirmed. "Barring complications, I believe he'll make a full recovery." The relief that flooded through the household was palpable. Elizabeth prepared a proper meal for the first time in days, insisting that Zara eat to maintain her strength for nursing. James reported that Marshal Bennett had agreed to post deputies near the house until the hearing, adding an official layer of protection to the private guards already in place. Only Rhett remained tense, his encounter with Edgar Jennings replaying in his mind. The man's resources and determination made him a formidable enemy, one who clearly viewed Zara and Robert as possessions to be reclaimed, rather than people with their own rights and desires. That night, as Zara slept deeply for the first time since Robert's illness began, Rhett sat by the window of their room, watching the snow-covered street below. The hired guards were visible at their posts, and occasionally a deputy's uniform passed by on patrol. Yet Rhett couldn't shake the feeling that their precautions might not be enough against a man like Jennings. His thoughts turned to the approaching court, hearing their best hope for permanent security. James had assured them repeatedly that Wyoming's progressive laws strongly favored Zara's position, particularly given the evidence of abuse. Once the divorce was granted and custody established, Edgar's legal claims would be severed. But 3 days remained until that hearing, 3 days during which Jennings had already proven willing to resort to intimidation and likely worse. The question that haunted Rhett was simple. How far would Edgar go to reclaim what he considered his property? The answer came the following night in the form of fire. Rhett had finally succumbed to exhaustion, sleeping beside Zara while Robert, now recovering steadily, rested in his cradle. A crash of breaking glass jolted them awake, followed immediately by shouts from outside and the unmistakable crackling of flames. "Fire! The house is on fire!" James burst into their room, hastily pulling on a robe. "Someone's thrown oil-soaked torches through the ground floor windows," he reported grimly. "The front of the house is already engulfed." Rhett was on his feet instantly, pulling on boots and reaching for Robert's cradle. "Back door should be clear," James replied. "Elizabeth's already heading that way with blankets and supplies." Zara gathered Robert, wrapping him in multiple layers against the bitter cold outside. The baby, still weak from his illness, whimpered softly but didn't fully wake. "Stay close to me," Rhett instructed, taking her arm to guide her through the increasingly smoke-filled house. They made their way down the back stairs, the air growing thicker with each step. Behind them, the crackle of flames intensified, hungry fire devouring the elegant home with frightening speed. Elizabeth waited at the back door, her arms full of hastily gathered necessities. "The carriage is ready," she reported, remarkably composed despite the disaster unfolding around them. "James's clerk lives 2 streets over. Will go there first." As they stepped outside, the full extent of the attack became clear. The front of the house blazed furiously, orange flames licking up toward the 2nd story. Several of their guards were working with neighbors to form a bucket brigade, while others searched the surrounding area for the attackers. "This way," James directed, leading them toward the carriage house where a horse was already harnessed to a small covered wagon. Quickly, before the fire spreads, they had nearly reached the carriage when a shot rang out, splintering wood near James's head. Everyone froze momentarily, then James shoved Elizabeth toward the wagon's relative safety. "Get in. Now." More shots followed as dark figures emerged from the shadows of neighboring properties. Rhett recognized Jennings' hired men, now brazenly attacking with firearms rather than attempting subtlety. "Get Zara and Robert into the wagon," Rhett told James, drawing his revolver. "I'll hold them off." "You'll do no such thing," a new voice declared as Marshal Bennett and 3 deputies appeared from the street side, weapons drawn. "Get your family to safety, Hawkins. We'll handle this." Grateful for the lawman's timely arrival, Rhett didn't hesitate further. He helped Zara into the wagon, where Elizabeth already sat with blankets ready to wrap around them, then climbed up beside James, who took the reins. As they pulled away, gunfire erupted behind them, the marshal's men engaging with Jennings' hired attackers. Zara clutched Robert to her chest, her face white with terror as she looked back at the burning house that had been their sanctuary. "He won't stop," she whispered, the realization seeming to settle into her bones. "He'll burn down the whole town if that's what it takes." Rhett reached back to clasp her hand, his expression grim but determined. "He won't get the chance," he promised. "This ends now." James drove the wagon through back streets and alleyways, eventually reaching the modest home of his young law clerk, Andrew Parker. The young man and his wife received them with shocked hospitality, quickly organizing their small home to accommodate the unexpected guests. While the women settled in the bedroom with Robert, Rhett pulled James aside to discuss their next steps. "The court hearing is still 2 days away," James reminded him, his face showing the strain of the night's events. "But after this attack, I believe we can petition Judge Wilson for an emergency ruling tomorrow morning. Will he grant it?" Rhett asked, acutely aware that their legal strategy now represented their best hope. "Wilson has a reputation for protecting women and children," James replied thoughtfully. "An attempted murder, which this clearly was, should convince even the most conservative judge that Jennings is unfit to claim custody." Marshal Bennett arrived an hour later, his uniform smudged with soot, but his expression satisfied. "We got them," he announced without preamble. "Both of Jennings' hired guns, wounded but alive. They're in custody and talking already, hoping for leniency." "And Jennings himself?" Rhett asked. The marshal's expression darkened. "Slipped away during the commotion." "But he won't get far. I've telegraphed every law enforcement office within 100 miles, and the railroad's been alerted not to sell him a ticket." Despite this assurance, Rhett felt uneasy. A man like Edgar Jennings, cornered and desperate, had become even more dangerous. He insisted on taking the first watch outside the Parker home, his revolver close at hand as he scanned the dark streets for any sign of movement. At dawn, James left for the courthouse to request the emergency hearing. Elizabeth and Mrs. Parker helped Zara tend to Robert, whose recovery had thankfully continued despite the night's disruption. The baby seemed stronger this morning, taking nourishment eagerly and even offering a brief smile that lifted everyone's spirits. By mid-morning, James returned with welcome news. "Judge Wilson has agreed to hear our case at noon today," he announced. "And he's issued a temporary restraining order against Jennings, effective immediately. Any attempt to approach Zara or the child will result in his immediate arrest." Relief washed through the household, though Rhett maintained his vigilance. He had expected Jennings to make another attempt before the hearing, but as the appointed hour approached with no sign of their adversary, he began to hope they might achieve their victory without further confrontation. The small courtroom was nearly empty when they arrived, only court officials and a few observers present. Marshal Bennett and a deputy provided escort, their presence a reassuring deterrent against potential interference. Judge Wilson, a stern-faced man with steel-gray hair and penetrating eyes, entered promptly at noon. After the formalities of opening the court, he reviewed the documents before him with careful attention, occasionally glancing up to study Zara, who sat holding Robert and Rhett beside her. "This is an unusual case," the judge observed finally. "Mrs. Jennings seeks divorce on grounds of cruelty with full custody of the infant child. She also requests permission to marry." He consulted his notes. Rhett Hawkins, who has acted as protector to both mother and child and wishes to legally adopt the boy. "That is correct, Your Honor," James confirmed, standing respectfully before the bench. "And the incidents of last night, the arson attack on your home, you attribute this to Edgar Jennings, the respondent in this case." "We do, Your Honor." Marshal Bennett has 2 men in custody who have provided sworn statements that Mr. Jennings hired them to, and I quote, "retrieve his wife and child by any means necessary." The judge's expression hardened. "I see. And where is Mr. Jennings now?" "I expected him or his counsel to appear to contest these proceedings." At that moment, the courtroom doors burst open with dramatic force. Edgar Jennings strode in, impeccably dressed despite his obviously hastily arranged appearance. Behind him came a distinguished older man carrying a legal briefcase, presumably his attorney. "Forgive my tardiness, Your Honor," Jennings said smoothly, ignoring the marshal who had immediately moved to intercept him. "I was unavoidably detained by your overzealous law enforcement." Judge Wilson frowned severely. "Mr. Jennings, you are subject to a restraining order that prohibits you from approaching the petitioner. Your presence here is in violation of that order." "I am here to contest these absurd proceedings," Jennings replied, his cultured voice carrying an undertone of anger. "As the husband of Zara Jennings and father of her child, I have legal rights that cannot be dismissed by false accusations." Rhett felt Zara trembling beside him, her arms tightening protectively around Robert. He placed his hand on her shoulder, silently communicating his support. "You will have your opportunity to speak, Mr. Jennings," the judge declared firmly, "but you will abide by the rules of my court. Take a seat away from the petitioner, or I will have the marshal remove you." With obvious reluctance, Jennings moved to the opposite side of the courtroom, his attorney hurrying behind him. The tension in the room was palpable as Judge Wilson returned to the documents before him. "Mrs. Jennings," he said finally, addressing Zara directly, "would you tell the court in your own words why you seek this divorce?" Zara handed Robert to Elizabeth, who had accompanied them as support, then stood. Though her voice quivered slightly at first, it strengthened as she recounted the years of control, isolation, and escalating physical abuse she had endured in her marriage. She described her flight west, finding sanctuary first with Agnes Sullivan and then with the Coopers. And finally, she spoke of Rhett, the kindness of a stranger who had become her protector, friend, and the man she wished to marry throughout her testimony. Edgar Jennings watched with an expression that shifted between contemptuous amusement and barely controlled rage. Several times his attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm when Jennings seemed about to interrupt. When Zara finished, Judge Wilson turned to her husband. "Mr. Jennings, you wish to contest these allegations?" "I do, Your Honor," Jennings declared, rising with the confident posture of a man accustomed to deference. "My wife has always been high-strung and imaginative. After her mother's death, she developed tendencies toward hysteria and fabrication that I, as a loving husband, attempted to manage through appropriate discipline." His characterization of abuse as appropriate discipline caused a murmur of disapproval among the courtroom observers, which the judge silenced with a sharp rap of his gavel. "Continue, Mr. Jennings." When Zara discovered she was with child, her mental state deteriorated further, Jennings claimed, his voice dripping with false concern. "She became paranoid, claimed I meant her harm. When I left on a brief business trip, she took advantage of my absence to flee, taking family valuables with her." Zara's indignant gasp was audible. Rhett squeezed her hand warningly, knowing that Jennings was attempting to provoke an emotional reaction that might support his portrayal of her as unstable. "And the child?" Judge Wilson inquired. "You claim paternity?" "Of course," Jennings replied smoothly. "The boy is my son and heir. I have every intention of providing him with the finest upbringing, the best education, all the advantages my position in St. Louis society can offer. Yet you set fire to the house where he was recovering from pneumonia," the judge observed dryly. An unusual demonstration of paternal concern. Jennings' composure slipped momentarily. "I categorically deny any involvement in that regrettable incident," he insisted. "My men were attempting to locate my wife and child, nothing more." "Your men have provided sworn statements to the contrary," Marshal Bennett interrupted from his position near the door. "They've admitted you ordered them to extract your wife and child from the Cooper residence by any means necessary, including force." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Jennings' face. His attorney leaned close, whispering urgently in his ear, but the St. Louis businessman waved him away impatiently. "Desperate men will say anything to save themselves," he declared. "The simple fact remains. Zara is my wife, legally bound to me until death. The child is my son. This court has no authority to sever those God-ordained connections." Judge Wilson removed his spectacles, fixing Jennings with a penetrating stare. "Mr. Jennings, you are in Wyoming territory now, not Missouri. Here, we recognize that marriage is a contract that can be dissolved when its fundamental provisions, mutual respect, safety, fidelity, have been violated." He replaced his spectacles and shuffled the papers before him. "Based on the evidence presented, including Mrs. Jennings' testimony, medical documentation of injuries consistent with physical abuse, witness statements regarding last night's arson attack, and your own demeanor in this courtroom, I find compelling grounds for dissolution of this marriage." Jennings' face darkened with rage. "You cannot." "I can and I do," the judge interrupted firmly. "It is the judgment of this court that the marriage between Edgar Jennings and Zara Jennings is hereby dissolved on grounds of extreme cruelty. Full custody of the minor child, Robert Sullivan Jennings, is awarded to the mother." He paused, then added with emphasis, "Furthermore, Edgar Jennings is permanently barred from approaching within 100 yards of either his former wife or the child, under penalty of immediate imprisonment." The pronouncement fell like a thunderclap in the small courtroom. Zara's hand flew to her mouth, tears of relief spilling down her cheeks. Rhett's arm encircled her shoulders, supporting her as the full impact of the ruling washed over them: freedom, safety. A future together suddenly transformed from dream to reality. Edgar Jennings' reaction was immediate and violent. "This is outrageous," he shouted, surging to his feet. "I will not be robbed of my property by some frontier judge in this backwater territory." "Mr. Jennings, you are in contempt of court," Judge Wilson declared, his voice cutting through the outburst with steely authority. "Marshal, remove him." As Bennett moved to comply, Jennings reached inside his coat with alarming speed, drawing a small Derringer pistol that had escaped detection. Before anyone could react, he aimed directly at Zara, his face contorted with fury. "If I can't have her, no one will," he snarled. What happened next occurred in fractions of seconds that seemed to stretch into eternity. Rhett lunged forward, placing himself between Zara and the weapon. Marshal Bennett drew his own firearm. The judge shouted for order. And through it all, the single crack of Jennings' Derringer echoed like cannon fire in the confined space. Rhett felt the impact high in his left shoulder, a burning sensation followed by spreading warmth as blood soaked through his shirt. He staggered but remained standing, shielding Zara and the baby with his body as Bennett tackled Jennings to the ground, disarming him with brutal efficiency. "Rhett!" Zara's scream pierced through the chaos as she realized he'd been shot. "Oh God, Rhett!" "I'm all right," he managed, though the room had begun to spin alarmingly. "Just a scratch." It wasn't, of course. The bullet had lodged in his shoulder, narrowly missing critical blood vessels but causing significant damage nonetheless. As he collapsed into a nearby chair, the courtroom erupted into frantic activity, the judge calling for a doctor, Bennett, and his deputy securing Jennings in handcuffs, Elizabeth taking Robert to protect him from the turbulence. Through it all, Zara remained at Rhett's side, pressing her handkerchief against the wound to slow the bleeding, her face pale but determined. "Don't you dare leave me now," she whispered fiercely. "Not when we've finally won." Rhett managed a weak smile, reaching up with his good hand to touch her cheek. "Not going anywhere," he promised. "Takes more than a fancy Derringer to stop a mail carrier." Within minutes, Dr. Peterson arrived, clearing space to examine the wound. "Needs to come out," he announced after a brief assessment. "But not here. We need to get him to my office." As they prepared to transport Rhett, Judge Wilson approached, his expression grave but compassionate. "The court's ruling stands," he assured Zara. "You're free, Mrs. Jennings." "And as for that man," he added, glancing toward Jennings, who sat sullen and defeated between two deputies, "attempted murder in open court should keep him imprisoned for many years." "Thank you, Your Honor," Zara replied, her attention still focused primarily on Rhett. "For everything." The judge nodded, then added with unexpected warmth, "When Mr. Hawkins has recovered, I would be honored to officiate at your wedding. It seems the least I can do after what he risked today." Zara's grateful smile was the last thing Rhett saw before darkness claimed him. Recovery was neither quick nor easy. The bullet had done significant damage to Rhett's shoulder, requiring weeks of healing before he regained full use of his arm. During this time, Edgar Jennings was tried and convicted of attempted murder, receiving a 20-year sentence in the territorial prison, effectively removing his threat from their lives for the foreseeable future. Spring arrived in Wyoming with new beginnings that mirrored the season's renewal. Robert, fully recovered from his illness, grew into a healthy, cheerful infant who delighted in reaching new milestones, his first intentional smile, the beginning attempts to roll over, the strengthening of his voice into joyful babbling. On a perfect May morning, with wildflowers dotting the prairie and birdsong filling the air, Rhett Hawkins and Zara Jennings were married in a simple ceremony in the Cooper's garden. Judge Wilson officiated as promised, his stern countenance softening as he pronounced them husband and wife before a small gathering of friends who had supported them through their trials. Mrs. Hawkins, Rhett whispered as they shared their first kiss as a married couple, the name bringing a radiant smile to Zara's face. Finally, she replied softly. Elizabeth had arranged a modest reception, during which James Cooper surprised them with unexpected news. The insurance settlement for his destroyed home had been substantial, and he had used part of the funds to purchase a small property on their behalf not in Cheyenne, but near the growing town of Laramie, where James had recently opened a branch of his legal practice. "It's nothing grand," he told them, presenting the deed with evident pleasure. 10 acres, a sturdy cabin, good water, but it's a place to start your life together, away from the memories of recent events. The generosity overwhelmed them both, Zara embracing Elizabeth tearfully while Rhett shook James's hand with emotional gratitude. After months of upheaval and danger, the gift of a home, a secure foundation for their future, seemed almost too perfect to believe. A week later, they departed Cheyenne in a wagon loaded with wedding gifts, supplies, and the few possessions they had accumulated. Robert traveled in a cushioned basket, contentedly watching the world pass by as Thunder and the gentle bay mare pulled their conveyance toward Laramie. "Happy?" Rhett asked, as their new property came into view, a picturesque stretch of land with a comfortable cabin, nestled against a backdrop of distant mountains. Zara, holding Robert on her lap, looked around at the wildflower-dotted meadow, the clear stream cutting through their property, the sheltering pines that would provide shade in summer and windbreak in winter. Then she looked at Rhett, her husband, at last, and the baby who had become their shared joy. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she replied, leaning against his shoulder, the one that had taken a bullet to save her life. "It's strange to think it all began because I fell asleep beside your horse that morning." Rhett chuckled, wrapping his arm around her as he guided the wagon toward their new home. "Best thing Thunder ever did, letting you use her for a pillow." "And you," Zara added softly, "offering breakfast to a desperate stranger." "Best offer I ever made," Rhett replied, kissing her temple gently. "Though I think I got the better end of that bargain." As they reached the cabin that would become their home, Robert began to fuss, hungry after the journey. Zara attended to him while Rhett unloaded essential supplies, both of them moving with the comfortable rhythm of a family that had found its harmony despite the tumultuous path that had brought them together. That evening, sitting on the cabin's small porch as sunset painted the western sky in brilliant hues, Rhett placed a carefully wrapped package in Zara's hands. "A wedding gift," he explained. "Meant to give it to you after the ceremony, but with all the excitement." Zara unwrapped the paper to reveal a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with a simple design of mountain wildflowers. Inside, the first page bore an inscription in Rhett's careful handwriting. "For Zara Hawkins to record our family story, beginning with a chance meeting beside a campfire in the Colorado wilderness. May all our days be filled with the love and courage that brought us home to each other." Rhett, tears welled in Zara's eyes as she traced the words with her fingertip. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Our story deserves to be remembered." "And continued," Rhett added, his gaze moving to Robert, who slept peacefully in a cradle Rhett had crafted during his recovery. "Maybe someday he'll want to know how his parents found each other." "I'll tell him everything," Zara promised, leaning against Rhett's side as darkness gradually claimed the landscape around them. "How a weary woman found safety beside a stranger's horse. How a kind man offered breakfast and changed her life forever. How love can grow in the most unexpected places." Rhett kissed her then, beneath the emerging stars of the Wyoming night, a kiss that spoke of promises kept and adventures yet to come. Whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, their bond forged in the crucible of danger and hardship, stronger for having been tested. As summer bloomed across their land, Rhett built the swing he had promised, hanging it from the sturdy branch of an old cottonwood tree beside the cabin. There Zara would sit for hours, Robert in her arms, watching Rhett work their small farm and craft the furniture that gradually filled their home. Sometimes she wrote in the journal, recording not only the significant events but also the quiet moments that formed the tapestry of their daily life. By Robert's first birthday, the cabin had expanded to include a second bedroom and a larger kitchen. Zara's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables for their table and herbs for the medicinal preparations she had learned from Agnes Sullivan. Rhett's carpentry skills had developed into a small business, with neighbors commissioning pieces that combined beauty with practical function. Letters arrived regularly from their friends in Cheyenne and Manassas. Agnes Sullivan wrote of her intention to visit in the spring, eager to see how her grandson had grown. The Coopers shared news of Cheyenne's society and Elizabeth's long-awaited pregnancy. Even Jim McAllister, the trapper who had helped them in their hour of need, stopped by during his seasonal travels, bringing gifts of furs and frontier wisdom. On crisp autumn evenings, when Robert had been tucked into bed and the day's work was done, Rhett and Zara would often sit before the fire, planning their future with quiet confidence. They spoke of expanding their farm, of siblings for Robert, of the community they were gradually building with neighboring homesteaders. "Did you ever imagine this life?" Zara asked one such evening, her head resting on Rhett's shoulder as they watched the flames dance in the hearth. "When you were riding your mail routes through the wilderness?" Rhett considered the question thoughtfully. "Not specifically," he admitted, "but I always felt I was searching for something. Never knew what until I found you sleeping beside Thunder that morning." He kissed the top of her head gently. "Turns out I was looking for home all along." "Home," Zara repeated softly, the word still carrying a special resonance after years of feeling adrift. "That's what we've built here, isn't it? Not just a house or a farm, but a true home. For us, for Robert, and for whoever else joins our family in the years to come," Rhett agreed. His hand moved to rest protectively over her abdomen, where the first subtle signs of their second child had recently become apparent. "This land will be their legacy, a place where they'll always be safe and loved." As winter settled once more across the Wyoming landscape, bringing pristine snow and crystalline skies, the Hawkins family embraced the season's quiet joys. Their cabin, snug against the cold, echoed with Robert's delighted laughter as he discovered the wonders of snowflakes and icicles. Zara's pregnancy progressed steadily, bringing a new softness to her features and a deeper contentment to her spirit. On Christmas Eve, after Robert had been enticed to sleep with promises of morning surprises, Rhett presented Zara with a special gift, a small carved wooden horse that perfectly captured Thunder's distinctive profile. "To remember how it all began," he said as she admired the intricate craftsmanship. "The best decision that old mare ever made, letting you sleep beside her." Zara placed the carving on the mantel, positioning it carefully beside the family portrait James Cooper had commissioned as a parting gift. In the image, captured by a traveling photographer during their final week in Cheyenne, Rhett stood tall and protective, Zara seated before him with Robert in her arms, a visual testament to the family they had forged through extraordinary circumstances. "We've come so far," she observed, her hand finding Rhett's as they gazed at the reminders of their journey. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it's real. As real as this," Rhett assured her, drawing her into a gentle embrace. His hand moved to the swell of her belly, where their second child stirred beneath his touch. And this, and everything will build together in the years to come. As midnight approached, bringing Christmas Day to their peaceful homestead, they stood at the cabin's window, watching snowflakes drift lazily in the moonlight. Beyond the immediate clearing, their land stretched into promised fields that would bloom with spring crops, pastures where future horses would graze, forests that would provide shelter for wildlife and lumber for their growing needs. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Hawkins," Rhett whispered, his arms encircling her from behind. "Merry Christmas, my love," Zara replied, leaning into his embrace with absolute trust. Outside, thunder nickered softly in her comfortable stable, perhaps remembering that fateful dawn when she had allowed a desperate woman to find shelter beside her, a simple act of equine tolerance that had set in motion a love story neither Rhett nor Zara could have imagined in their loneliest moments. From such unlikely beginnings had grown this life of profound contentment, proof that even in the wild and often unforgiving West, happiness could be found in the most unexpected encounters, and love could transform the weariest travelers into people who had finally, irrevocably, found their way home.